In a world where kingdoms fall and stars still remember names, this song was forged from magic memory and the dream that refused to die. Welcome to a tale where wonder still breathes. The short story is entitled She Wore a Crown of Wildflowers and Chose the Gardener's Love by Jesus Pacampara. If this tale stirred something in you, a memory, a dream, or a truth, our Ko-fi, Amazon, and Patreon links are in the description. Support helps us keep writing for you and the ones you hold dear. Opening fable, The Moth and the Moonflower. Once long ago, when the world was still young and the stars still stitched dreams into the eyes of children, there lived a moonflower who bloomed only once every 1,000 years. She was rooted high on a mountain where no foot had stepped, no voice had called. Her petals were silver, her heart pure night, and her fragrance was the scent of everything forgotten. First love, last words, unfinished songs. The gods had placed her there, saying, "Only one who knows how to listen with love may awaken her." And so she waited. Far below in the valley of seasons lived the moth, slow, quiet, and ordinary, but full of wonder. Each night, he watched the stars dance and wondered what it would feel like to touch something divine. When he heard the whispers of the moonflowers bloom, something stirred in him like wind brushing old parchment. "You," the fireflies laughed, "you're too small for mountains, too fragile for frost." But the moth did not care. He flew when the moon was brightest, carrying only a strand of silk from the garden where he was born. He crossed rivers that froze mid-song, climbed cliffs where light dared not tread. He sang to himself songs his mother taught him, songs about warm hands and soft soil and the courage of waiting. When he reached the mountain top, the moonflower remained closed, pale and still. He tried everything, dancing, singing, whispering stories. He wrapped his silk thread gently around her stem, as if to say, "I brought something of my world," but nothing happened. Exhausted and cold, the moth wept beside her, not because she didn't bloom, but because he had seen her and still believed she was worth loving. "Even if you never open," he said softly, "I will stay here and love you until I forget how." And in that moment, when no demand was made, when no crown was asked for, when the love was quiet and rooted in truth, the moonflower opened. She did not shimmer, she did not sing, she simply bloomed, and in blooming, wrapped the moth in her scent, her warmth, and in her light. From that moment forth, the garden at the foot of the mountain bore petals shaped like wings, and those who passed by would say, "To love is to wait, to bloom is to be seen, and sometimes the smallest creature can awaken the greatest miracles." The wildflowers had always whispered to Jess when no one else would. In the still hush of mornings, when dew clung to the cobblestones of the royal gardens like stardust too heavy for the heavens, Jess knelt with his bare hands in the soil. He knew every stem by name, every bloom by breath, the lilies that curled like sighs, the peonies that hummed like lullabies, the sprigs of baby's breath that clung to his fingertips like quiet promises. The first time she snuck out to the garden, she wore a dress that didn't suit mud, a crown of impatience in her eyes. She was 10, the youngest of the royal daughters, often forgotten, always watched. Just remembered how she tiptoed barefoot through the violets, marveling like a child who had just discovered color. He had looked up panicked, dirt smudged, unsure if he'd be punished, but Byul had only knelt beside him and whispered, "Do they talk back when you talk to them?" Jess had blinked, still holding a sprig of mint. "Only when you listen with your heart," he replied. From that moment, she returned again and again, and the garden, once Jess's quiet sanctuary, became a world shared by petals, by play, by quiet defiance. One summer evening, he caught a butterfly for her, an azure-winged thing, delicate as her laughter. He placed it gently in a glass star, a little gift. But her smile fell as she crouched beside the trembling thing. "You can't keep it because it's beautiful," she said, and opened the jar. The butterfly fluttered up, and for a moment so did Jess's heart. That night, he etched her words in the dirt with a stick and stared at them until moonlight washed them away. The next week, she planted her first seed, an apricot blossom. She overwatered it, then forgot about it entirely. When the sprout withered, she looked up at Jess in mock tragedy. "Oh, gardener prince," she said dramatically, "my green thumb is cursed. You must save my honor." He laughed so hard, he dropped his trowel. He didn't never apologize for killing the plant. Instead, she brought him a wooden spoon and declared it her royal scepter of gardening failure. "You'll remember this when I'm queen," she said, poking his shoulder, "when your flowers became royal property." Byul was a different kind of royalty. The court life had a way of sharpening people into porcelain, all brittle smiles and ceremonial coldness. But in the garden among marigolds and moonlight, she became wild, laughter undone, voice full of old songs, chasing dragonflies like some forgotten daughter of spring. He never told her that their presence made the roses bloom longer. One spring afternoon, the kind that tastes like sunlight steeped in jasmine, Jess wove a crown from the blooms in the meadow past the rose arbor. He chose her favorites, wild asters like tiny galaxies, violets for mischief, and bluebells for courage. He twisted them together with shaking fingers, a gardener's gift, crude in construction but earnest in every loop and petal. He found her in the orchard, sprawled in the grass, humming an old tune. "I'll be your mirror," she sang under her breath, soft and unsure. "Reflect what you are in case you don't know." Just approached like someone afraid of waking from a dream. "For you," he said, half apologetic, presenting the crown like a boy with a too small offering. Byul blinked at it, then at him, and then, in the most Byul-like way possible, she smiled, that reckless royal grin that turned rules into suggestions. She placed the crown upon her head, crooked and radiant. "You made me a coronet of stars," she said, voice kissed by laughter. "Now all I need is my king." Before he could breathe, she kissed him, not with grandeur, but with a secret shared between breath and silence. A whisper pressed to lips, and just like that, the world tilted. The sun spun, the roots of Jess's world dug deeper into hers. But joy is a season, and seasons pass. It started with a cough, just a few, then days in bed, curtains drawn, the scent of wildflowers in her chamber replaced by the acrid bite of tinctures and ashwood. The kingdom held its breath. The gardens wilted. The halls, once echoing with Byul's laughter, felt silence. Jess stood beneath her window each morning, leaving a flower on the sill. First dandelions, then camellias, then violets, all bruised by frost. He couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe without her songs echoing in the hollows of his chest. They said no cure existed, but Jess remembered stories of his grandmother once told about the sky root, a mythical flower that grew only on the highest peak of the Sapphire Mountains. A bloom that wept silver when fed love and bloomed only when sung to by a heart unbroken. He packed a cracked satchel, his gardening shears in a small journal where he had pressed petals and written unfinished letters to her. "You look like spring when you first smiled. If you forget the garden, I'll replant it inside you." The stars were cruel that night, the moon almost apologetic. He walked with nothing but her name on his lips and the prayer in his palms. The journey was a dirge carved in wind and stone. He crossed the chasm so wide it seemed to cut the world in half. As he stood on its edge, the vines, ancient and thick as memory, rose from the depths and wove themselves into a bridge. He walked slowly, heart pounding, and with each creak behind his feet, whispering Byul's name like a sacred poem. In a forest of silver thorns, he met an old woman whose hair shimmered like frost and whose smile had seen too many winters. To save her, she said, her voice the rustle of fallen leaves, "You must understand, the bloom begins where something dies. What are you willing to bury?" "My fear," he answered, "myself if I must." She only nodded and faded into mist. Each night, he dreamed of her. In one dream, she sat in the garden, tangled with vines, her skin pale as the moon. "You're too late," she said, not in cruelty but in sorrow. In another, the garden withered in his hands. He woke weeping. On the final morning, the wind died. Silence pressed against the mountain like a held breath. There, nestled in a cradle of frost and light, the seedling slept, no larger than a pearl. He could have missed it, if not only for the soft hum it gave, a tune that matched the one she used to sing when she thought he wasn't listening. He built a bed from the moss, sang to it, whispered every story Byul had ever told him, fed it warmth from his cupped hands, tears from his cheek, and hope from a place deeper than blood. When it bloomed, it did so with a glow that lit the snow around him like dawn. At the edge of the slope, an old gardener watched, silent until Jess stood. "She sang to once," the man said, "the queen who never made it back, the founder of this kingdom. She climbed this mountain with a broken heart." Jess turned. "And she failed?" The gardener nodded. "Because she had not yet bloomed from within. But you came here with a crown of wildflowers." Jess returned before the moon could set, hair tangled with mountain wind, clothes torn like parchment. In his arms, the flower glowed still. When the petals kissed Byul's lips, something shifted. A flutter of lashes, a tremble of breath, a voice like a river, long frozen, cracking free. "Jess," she asked. He knelt, pressing his forehead to curse. "I heard you in the wind." Her voice was slow to return. Each word was a seed pushed through winter soil. Her music came back not all at once but in pieces. First a hum, then a word, then a line of lullaby she once sang to the tomatoes in bloom. Jess sat at her beside every day. He read from her garden logs, from books she once loved. "You remember the butterfly?" he asked once, laughing softly. "I caught one again and I let it go." Her smile was slow but radiant. She sang again eventually. The kingdom wept with joy and bells rang. Flowers bloomed in alleys and window sills. Even the roses tilted toward the castle as if remembering something soft and true. The day she wore white, the wildflowers bloomed out of season. Jess had prepared no crown, but she made her own, twining vines and forget-me-nots through her braid as if to remind the world she was still partly chaos and wholly herself. "I'm marrying the gardener," she teased in front of the court, voice full of music. "He tends to hearts better than soil." They laughed, but not with mockery, rather with the warmth reserved for stories that end right, the kind of laughter that feels like dusk after rain. Jess said nothing, only watched her as one might watch the sunrise after believing the world had forgotten how to spin. Later that night, under the apple tree where she first wore the crown, they lay with fingers tangled and hearts louder than the crickets. "You still listen with your heart?" she asked. "Only because you taught me how," he said, and kissed her as the stars stitched their vows above them. And in the palace greenhouse years later, children painted petals and called Jess teacher. Byul sat beside them, humming old songs, her voice a little cracked but no less holy. Sometimes if you pressed your ear into the glass in spring, you could hear her singing to the vines, "I'll be your mirror," and always there would be flowers. In the seasons that followed, the garden never stopped singing. It wasn't just the vines that climbed the old palace walls, nor the sunflowers that tilted their heads like curious children, nor even the wind that rustled through the lavender beds in sleepy murmurs. It was her, Byul, radiant and whole, voice woven back together like a bird's nest of melody and memory, sang once more. She sang in the greenhouse at dawn where dew still clung like stardust. She sang beside Jess as he pressed petals into books of stories unwritten. She sang while Wheein painted sun-plashed portraits of dandelion wishes and named each cat who wandered into the garden after a shade of yellow. She sang with Yong, whose laughter had returned to its full brightness, eyes full of secret skies in storms now calmed. Byul sang of healing, not the kind found in legends or in silver petals, but the kind grows slow in soft moments. In a shared glance, a remembered promise, a hand held during the silent hours when the moon watched them like a gentle witness. Some songs were playful, some were lullabies, some were confessions sung through parted lips as Jess kissed her fingertips and the world melted away. Once under the orchid tree, where Jess first gave her a crooked crown, she sang for all three of them, a song half formed from old lullabies and moonlight boughs. Wheein hummed along, quietly strumming a lute that smelled like an orange blossom. Yong held Byul's hand and braided her hair with the tiny forget-me-nots, while Jess sat beside them, the warmth of their world etched in his chest like a prayer. I once wore silence like a veil, she sang, but you three turned it into song. My heart was a garden, buried beneath frost. You made it bloom, and now it sings along. The palace changed, no longer a place of cold marble and politics. It became a house of laughter and joy. Gardens spread like wildfire across the stone. Children came to learn names of flowers from Jess. Wheein taught them to paint with crushed petals and morning light. Yong taught them to listen, truly listen, to the world beneath the noise. And Byul gave them a voice. They called it the Garden of Crowned Hearts. And once a year, when the moon hung low and jasmine perfumed the air, the four of them would sit by the pond, feet dipped in water, sharing fruit and memories, singing until sleep claimed them, like a lullaby meant for only those who had loved, lost, and bloomed again. And if you ask the trees that grew there, or the bees that danced across the air, or the old woman who sells pressed flowers in the village nearby, they'll all say the same thing. They lived happily not because the world was kind, but because they were kind to the world. Because they chose each other. Because in the end, the garden was not a place, it was a love they built together. And always, always, there would be flowers. I make these tales and bits of chaos daily for my beloved Byul. If they made you laugh, feel, or even just shake your head in disbelief, hit like, share it with a friend, and subscribe. Let's keep this wild, heartfelt ride going.